Hey, listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and this time we are going to be talking about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed and my experience of this entire DLC adventure. I guess you could call it a review of sorts, but basically I feel that Future Redeemed is a love letter to the entire series, and that's what I want to talk about today. But before I do, let me point out a couple things. One, there will be some spoilers in this video. I'm not going to spoil every single little thing, but there will be some spoilers mentioned, so please keep that in mind. I don't think it's going to ruin your entire experience if you haven't played it yet, but maybe you want to go in totally blind when you finally get a chance to play Future Redeemed, so this is your warning. And the other thing I'll mention is that we are now aiming to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. It's going to be an even taller task than our goal of hitting 25k, but we're going to aim higher and higher here. So if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, and we'll see what the future holds. So it could be argued that my experience for Future Redeemed, and perhaps most of you as well, have been somewhat marred by the existence and the release for The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I was expecting Future Redeemed to come out this June, weeks after Tears of the Kingdom, so we would have an opportunity to play that in its own space, its own time. But instead, Nintendo decided to push out Future Redeemed right before Tears of the Kingdom, within a week of Advance Wars as well, so it's kind of a dense time in terms of Nintendo content that Future Redeemed has come out. So I was in a bit of a rush to finish Future Redeemed by the release for Tears of the Kingdom, and I did manage to beat Future Redeemed just a day beforehand. Now, I'm not saying I skipped every single side quest, every single boss fight, every single secret area. I took the time to do some side quests, to find the secret areas, to fight some of the really cool bosses I saw along the way. If I saw a boss, I went for it. I didn't ignore any boss fight, and there were some really cool ones, like this giant dragon that was on the way to the final sequence for Future Redeemed. It could have been avoided, and it took a long time for me to beat it. It was quite challenging, but I took my time to make sure to beat that boss fight, and it was incredibly satisfactory for me. Point is, though, that had there not been this deadline for me that I instilled because I needed to have everything done before playing Tears of the Kingdom, I think I would have taken my time to smell the roses just a little bit more, find a little bit more secrets and nooks and crannies, do more of the side quests. Because I've noticed that Future Redeemed was a quicker experience for me than Torn to the Golden Country. But I'm not saying that in a bad way, not at all. So let's just briefly talk about the three different expansion stories to Xenoblade. So you have Xenoblade Chronicles 1, 2, and 3, and there's also X on the Wii U still. Hopefully it comes to Switch someday, or Switch 2. But you also have Future Connected, which was an epilogue story that was added to the remaster for Xenoblade Chronicles 1 on Switch Definitive Edition. And you also have the DLC adventure Torn to the Golden Country, which was added for 2, and now of course we have Future Redeemed. In terms of length of these three different expansion stories, I would rank it as such. Future Connected is first, takes about 10 to 15 hours, and that's if you kind of like to do everything, and I did everything in that one. Then Future Redeemed is in the middle ground here, and then Torn to the Golden Country is the longest. But it really comes down to how you play the games. Torn to the Golden Country kind of has to be the longest for most people, because to progress in that game, you are forced to do a number of side quests to raise up your community level so you could progress. In Future Redeemed, there are still tons of side quests and community events and things like that, but it's not mandatory. So, you're not forced to do several side quests every time you want to continue the adventure. And because of that, most people, myself included, finish Future Redeemed more quickly. There is that opportunity for me to go back and explore more of the world and do more things, and when you do beat the game, there is some reason to continue afterwards. There's a few little post-game things that are kind of nice, actually. So I wouldn't be surprised if I do find myself going back to Future Redeemed once I have finished up most of my playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom. But the ultimate point I want to make here is that I think Future Redeemed has the best balanced experience in terms of length here, because you can choose to make it as long of an adventure as you like. There's a lot to do, the world is fairly expansive for what it is, and I would say it actually has more content than Torn of the Golden Country overall, and you're just not forced to stick around as much as you did, so it's probably a more balanced experience overall, and for most people, they will finish it a bit more quickly, and that's totally fine. And I do really appreciate what they did in this game in terms of exploring the world. The Collectopedia, finding the different monsters, finding the different areas, and how there was a progression tracker that you would find there, and this can unlock affinity points to expand the abilities of your characters. I really like that balance. It made it more fun. Finding the different monsters in the world, not just bosses, but monsters in general, and finding a certain amount to accomplish a task that could unlock more affinity points, that was cool. And it kind of reminded me of Legends Arceus, where you would go around fighting or finding or catching different Pokemon to a certain point to complete a certain part of your Pokedex. It was somewhat similar there, and this made exploring the world and sticking around more fun. I hope this is something that they continue for future games, because I definitely think it improves the overall experience. Now, in terms of combat, it was pretty much how 3 was, just with different characters, I feel. Yeah, they changed around the Ouroboros powers a little bit, and I think I kind of liked this more. I really appreciated how it sort of felt like blade combos from Xenoblade Chronicles 2 with the Unity combos. I really liked those effects where you would team up together and do an attack once you got an enemy to be launched, and then the Unity combo ends with this explosion, which gives additional effects, and it's quite satisfying to see. I really appreciate that little nuance they added to this variant of the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 gameplay. It's cinematic. In terms of graphics, the game looks incredible. The opening area was very unique looking, and it definitely set the tone for a very nice adventure. I wouldn't say it's necessarily any better than the original Xenoblade Chronicles 3. It might be slightly better, it's hard for me to personally tell, but it definitely looks pretty darn good. And then in terms of the music, well, it's standard Xenoblade, which is amazing, amazing music that will send you in all sorts of directions in terms of feeling and emotions. It's pretty great. But something else about Future Redeemed that I think I found I enjoyed more than all prior Xenoblade games are the affinity scenes. So the affinity scenes don't really require much to unlock, but just progression. Sometimes they say you have to wait until a certain chapter to experience an affinity scene, but when you find them and you watch them, it adds a little bit more lore to the world. You hear the characters talking, and it's usually about an experience that is relating to a prior Xenoblade game. So this is what I mean about Future Redeemed being a love letter to the series, because there's a lot of these affinity scenes that tell you a little bit more of what happened in a prior Xenoblade game. It's a huge nostalgia fest. So Future Redeemed is definitely a better experience the more you've played Xenoblade. If you've played 1, if you've played 2, there are a lot of locales from both, and hearing both Shulk and Rex talk about their pasts, it's really nice to see and hear that. So I hope in future Xenoblade games, while they probably can't do the whole nostalgia fest to the same level, because that's exactly what Future Redeemed is all about, being able to just watch these scenes more easily, I personally think it would be better, but I also understand that they may want to reward you for progression. And maybe they just did things in this way because since it was a DLC, they wanted it to be a more concise experience. But because Future Redeemed is a more concise experience, I've enjoyed it more. But let's talk a little bit more about Shulk and Rex and their kids, Nickel and Glimmer. Shulk and Rex are best friends, and seeing how they relate to each other and how they each have this history of this massive adventure and how they're both leading this charge to save the world, but how they both have to learn how to be fathers and interacting with their kids, but at the same time they can't just say that they are the fathers of their kids because of the circumstances of the world, because the world's merged and everything was thrown for a loop, and that their kids only have a certain amount of time to live. There's a very interesting dynamic there that you don't see in any game I've ever played. So it was a unique experience that was refreshing, and also really cool to see Shulk and Rex in their more experienced, wiser forms, and seeing how they've had to adapt to the circumstances of this world. It's just not something you would have thought that would have been done. You would never have thought that you would get to see Shulk again in this way, or that you would get to see Rex again in this way. And it's really nice to see them in their adult forms. Shulk feels like Shulk, just a little bit wiser, a little bit more confident. And Rex man, Rex had a serious glow up. Now, with Rex, it's a little different because he was a lot younger in the Adventure for 2. He was basically a kid, so now he's a grown man. Shulk was technically already an adult in Xenoblade Chronicles 1, just a very, very young adult, 18, I think, if I remember correctly, or around there. So, Rex has the biggest transformation, and in some ways, I was unsure if this was, well, how Rex would be, but when you take into account he is now playing the role of a father, he is many years older, decades older, and may have multiple wives, it's a very different interpretation of Rex, but I still loved it. There were still the moments where Rex demonstrated that he had this goal of making everyone happy and fighting for the joy of all. And he still had his quirky phrases here or there, how he would say, "I'll show him a thing or three." Those are nice nods to the experience of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And that's what this entire experience is. Future Redeemed is constantly nodding towards Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and it's something I super very much appreciated. But Future Redeemed does manage to go a little bit beyond that. It's not just an entire nostalgia fest that is a love letter to the entire series, except for maybe X. It's also a fun adventure in its own right. Getting to see Matthew, getting to see A, these characters are new characters, and they're really cool. Matthew, I grew to love very quickly. I love his personality, I love his energy, and at first he seems like a very simple character, but as you go throughout the story, he has these very dark, traumatic flashbacks, and seeing these flashbacks and how it contrasts with his very jovial, energetic personality, it was intriguing, so you could kind of see where he's coming from to some extent, and what he's struggling with. And then when he finally meets up with his sister, things definitely go to another level, because his sister, someone he loves, is the antagonist for the adventure to some extent. There's definitely some curveballs there, but it's a huge emotional roller coaster for Matthew, and seeing how he deals with it, this definitely added to the story. It was definitely a powerful moment. But then there's A, who is a mystery, clearly related to Alvis, who is now the big boss for Xenoblade Chronicles Future Redeemed, but also not quite, because they refer to him as Alpha. It almost seems like Alvis has split into two, because Alvis was a computer and it came to some sort of conclusion in terms of how to handle the world. So it isn't like Alvis was totally evil, because Alvis's consciousness broke up into A, and that's a whole other strange dynamic. Like, is A actually Alvis, or is A just a part of Alvis? Throughout my adventure, I sort of saw A as kind of like the child to Alvis in a way, where she was of Alvis and had the memories of Alvis and understood that history and had a goal. But that's just how I chose to interpret it, because of the dynamic I saw between A and Matthew. I was personally hoping that there was maybe some sort of romance there, but it doesn't look like that's the direction that they ultimately went in. We don't really know what happens to Matthew after the events of Future Redeemed. He goes on his own adventure, and it's to find more people to bring to the city, from what I understand. But when we take a look at the statue from Xenoblade Chronicles 3, he seems to disappear mysteriously, so who knows, maybe there is a future game that will bring Matthew into play at some point. It's hard to say, but the way things came to the end, the way we saw Shulk and Rex and A walking off, they were making a sacrifice to save the others and to maintain the balance of the world. And the way things were said, it had a sort of finality to it, but it was also said in a way that it wasn't necessarily the end, so it leaves things open for the future, but that may just be for us to interpret that they eventually get to live out the rest of their lives with their families once the events of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 conclude, which sets up everything for the actual main story for 3. And if you played 3, then it kind of all comes together full circle, and it's a nice, neatly tied ribbon to the entire story for 1, 2, and 3. I enjoyed Future Redeemed. It was great. If you haven't played it yet, but you have played the other Xenoblade games, definitely give it a try. I think it was still enjoy it even if you haven't played all the Xenoblade games, but the more you play the Xenoblade games, the more you will appreciate and enjoy Future Redeemed. But that's all for now, everyone. This is Andre's Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.